Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Stephen Warley in Washington, D.C. Stephen is the founder of Life Skills That Matter. His mission is to relieve people of their work anxieties by empowering them to design their own work. This is Stephen's second appearance on the Copeland Coaching Podcast. Stephen, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me back, Angela. I had a great time the first time and looking forward to sharing a lot of fun and hopefully useful information with your listeners today.
Yes. Well, I've got to ask you, what do you feel like is one of the biggest sources of our anxiety at work?
I think we could all relate to this feeling in a variety of ways. We feel like we're never doing enough, or we're never enough. Even though we're probably all working harder than ever before and we're doing more stuff than ever before, we still feel like we're just not enough. We're not doing enough. And there is a limit on that. We're humans. We are not machines. And we have to really, and that's what I want to help people understand, is really that, what are the priorities? What are your priorities? What are your values, needs, your abilities, to really focus on that so you can be doing enough and you can be really targeting your energy, your time, and your money in a way that's not going to make you lose your sanity.
So you mentioned that, it comes from feeling like we're not doing enough. Like, where does that start? Like, is it because we're working for people who believe that we're not doing enough? Is it because there's pressure from society? Like, where does it originate?
I think it's how work is structured. It's structured in a hierarchy. And what we've always been told, even our entire education system, is like an assembly line. It's a hierarchy. You do this, then you move up. You do this, you move up, and you're incrementally getting more successful. You're getting more responsibility. You're getting more prestige. Your income is going up. So I think there's always that internal competition with all of our peers, too, about who, as we move up the ladder, there's fewer and fewer of those positions and those opportunities. So it by design is making us feel like we're in a constant state of like, ooh, I don't know how safe I am, how secure I am, will I be able to move up? And the world, and that's a very scarcity mentality. Like I always tell people, when people look at their income in terms of just jobs, that's a scarcity mentality. There are a limited amount of jobs, right? But if you look at the world in terms of problems to solve, well, I think most of us would argue that there's probably infinite problems to be solved. So if you look at your economic opportunities in that sort of way, I think you're much more optimistic about your work prospects, and that actually reduces your anxiety.
I agree. And you mentioned, prioritizing. It makes me think of, I come from a very sort of corporate background. So when I started Copeland Coaching, I started thinking of all the things from a marketing perspective, for example, that I needed to do. And it was like, I need to have a podcast. I need to be on Instagram. I need to be on Facebook and have a following. And I had this whole giant list. And I met with one of my mentors not too long ago and was talking through sort of all this with him. And we talked about my goals. And when I laid those goals out, I actually had like 20 big goals. And we talked about, prioritizing and boiling it down to 3 goals, focusing on those and then sort of like not focusing on the other, 17. And I think for me, it's definitely reduced a lot of stress to feel like I'm focused on like a couple of particular things, being really good at those things as opposed to being so-so at like 20 different things.
And do you feel like you really know why you're doing those 3 things now versus those other 7?
Totally, because I was able to prioritize them and say which of these things it was kind of like which do I enjoy, which has the biggest potential for growth, and which has the biggest revenue potential. Like what are those, what do those things look like? And I was able.
Can I give a quick exercise around?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So like Angela, if you have 20 things that you want to do, you think you're supposed to be doing, I want you to like bucket the items that you're really good at. And then what are the ones that not only you're really good at, that you're really excited about doing and you still stay motivated? And then what are the ones that people really want? Those are those 3 filters that will really help you narrow down your list. So what are you really good at? What are you excited about? And what do people really want from you?
I think those are, that's a good thing to consider. I think in this case, that those are kind of the 3 that I tried to, the 3 that I picked actually kind of do fall into those categories of things like, for example, coaching. I work with clients one-on-one, to look for a job. And that's an area where I excel and that is helpful to other people and that they want. But then there are some things like having a really amazing Facebook page, which I think there's kind of an expectation of, but it doesn't necessarily add a lot of value and it takes a lot of time.
Guess what, Angela? I have a crazy challenge for myself that I want to get off Facebook completely in the next year, and I want to be able to say that I've built my business without Facebook.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm.
But it feels so liberating, again, because I think sometimes what we're also hearing some themes in our conversation, there's these things that we feel like we're supposed to be doing versus the things that we want to do and we're naturally motivated to do. And I'm always encouraging people, whether you're transitioning your career, you're looking for a job, you want to start your own business, it's about calling yourself out to say, do I feel like I have to do this because other people expect it of me or society expects it of me, or do I really want to do it? And I'm trying to encourage people to start focusing more on the stuff that you naturally want to do.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like forgetting all those rules that are sort of put around us, or the fence, and just thinking like, if I didn't have to follow these rules, like what would I just naturally want to do?
I always tell people that we are playing, in terms of our careers, we are playing by the old rules to a new game that we don't even realize that we're playing. Another crazy exercise I throw out to people is, how would you find a job if you didn't have a resume? What would you do? And it's possible, and it's actually more effective.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't think the resume is as important as people think it is.
Because when you don't have the resume, that forces you to be like, oh, that means I have to go understand what I really want, who needs my help or what are problems, who are those people that have those problems. I got to go meet them and build really authentic, deep relationships with them. And that's how you create really valuable work for yourself that you're excited about, and it's going to pay you better.
It's totally true. And that's how you get a job, as opposed to getting the font just right on your resume.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious, like you study, you're kind of like a future of work advocate, and you study trends about how work is changing. I mean, what are the top trends that you're seeing about how work is fundamentally changing?
Here's the thing. Somebody asked me on another podcast, how is work changing that we've seen this before, but also how is it different? How it's been similar, this is a fundamental shift in work that we have not seen since the Industrial Revolution, where everybody left the farms and went to the cities and to factories. So now we're going into a shift of independent work, or even if you are going to be a traditional W-2 employee, you're going to be managing more of your time and yourself than ever before, right? How it's different in terms of this, in human history, we've never seen the pace of change accelerate this fast. So this is going to be radical transformation over the next 10 to 20 years. The 4 trends that I've identified are, number 1, we are now in a permanent state of change. There's no longer, I can't wait until all the change is done, and then I'll know how it's going to coast for the next 10 years. It's just going to be constantly changing every aspect of work. Number 2, automation. We've heard a lot about automation. Automation is not as ugly as we think it is. It is going to eliminate some work, but it's actually going to change the majority of work. And in some ways, as a self-employed person, and maybe you've found this too as well, Angela, it's actually made working easier. Like automation has been a positive to me in my work. So that's something that we really want to be thinking about too, and how it's going to affect our work. I was actually just talking to a pipe fitter who's in a union here in Boston, was visiting a friend, and how they're using automation to accelerate the pace of construction of buildings. Every time I'm having all of these moments in different industries of how automation, artificial intelligence already today, right now, is accelerating this change and changing how we think about work in those professions. We're also seeing decentralized management. Some of you have already maybe experienced that by getting to work from home, doing remote work, or maybe you're working in more collaborative teams. We've seen this long-term trend of the flattening of organizations. I happen to think managers, instead of telling us what to do and setting strategy, they're going to more function like coaches, because in collaborative teams, they can react to trends in that accelerated pace of change much more quickly than sending up, I noticed this happened, send it up to the chain of command in a traditional hierarchy and then send it back down and try to change it. That's just too slow. And finally, our mass market is disintegrating into infinite niches. It's no longer valuable to follow the crowd, to be like everybody else. It's more valuable truly to be yourself. It's never been more important to be yourself than right now. you and I are really advising people on their careers, but we have two different perspectives, different backgrounds, circumstances. I'm always telling people, even if somebody's already doing something that you want to do, the way that you are going to do it is going to make it unique. And there is an audience, there's a community, there's a customer base out there, or there's a company that wants you and how you do it. So don't be afraid to do something that you think other people are already doing. So those are those 4 trends.
Oh, I like that.
Permanent state of change, automation, decentralized management, and mass market disintegrating into infinite niches.
I like that. And I like the fact that you mentioned that management is moving more towards sort of like being like a coach or coaching than the old school style of management. Because I think, at least for me and the way that I work, that's just so much more effective to have someone that's encouraging you and helping you to ensure that you can do things and move forward, but is, sort of taking a different approach that allows you to really use your own skills and your own strengths. And
also that information is more democratized now, right? It's hard. Things are changing so fast that a lot of times management has to ask the frontline people for the latest information about what's going on. And increasingly, companies are going to hire people that can think for themselves. That's what's also changing. More and more companies are not going to be hiring to fill positions to be, do this thing over and over again. They're hiring you to function more like a self-employed person, to say, listen, you've done a lot of research, you've done a lot of experiments and projects around this. What do you think we should do? They're looking to you as a resource, not as somebody who is just going to be directed.
I totally agree. I remember years ago getting a job where it was a director level position, and I had a friend who said to me, when are they going to train you on how to do your job? And I said, if they need to train me to do my job, I'm probably not the right person for this job. They're hiring me for my own expertise and to kind of come in and consult them, on what I think, my opinions, as opposed to just telling me how to do things.
Absolutely. And this is all evolving, and it's going to be different from industry to industry, company to company. But these are the longer term trends. These are the trends that forward-thinking companies understand, or I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the Zappos and how they've reorganized their company in terms of management?
With Zappos, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am very familiar with Zappos. I actually once toured their facility because I'm such a big fan, and I have a couple books that their former, or he may still be their CEO, but wrote. But I'm not sure. Tell me a little bit about the reorganization that you're talking about.
I think it was a couple of years ago where they decided to really get rid of hierarchy and reorganize the company in the way that I've been describing, around collaborative teams that would be accepting information. They would talk about it, and they would come to a decision. The idea is that to be competitive, as a competitive advantage, to accept this information from the marketplace more quickly and to act on it more quickly. Now, there's been also a lot written about that. 20% of the people from Zappos have left, and, all things are chaos. But I really applaud the visionary, spirit of entrepreneurship there, and really trying to do something different. And I think there's a lot of naysayers because people, humans inherently are very skeptical of change. We don't like it, even though everything's constantly changing around us and faster nowadays. But I think it is a model to be looking toward for how I think people are going to work. As a self-employed person, this is how I work, maybe how you work, Angela, how you work with your customers, how you work with your vendors and your team members. It is in a collaborative way. When I hire people or I take on people to execute different projects, I'm truly looking to them for their expertise because I don't know everything. That's not my job.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, as we talk about this sort of like management changing and things shifting, I know something that's really important to you, and you mentioned it a couple of times, is self-management. And I'm curious, like, from your perspective, what is self-management? Like, what does that include?
Another term I also like to use is I call it the decision shift. I think a lot of folks, we like traditional employment because of the steady paycheck, the sense of community, belonging to something larger than myself. But what we also really like is that a lot of the decisions that we have to make about our work are basically farmed out to management or a central authority. And when you work for yourself, all those decisions come back to you right in your lap. You are responsible for everything, like when you're going to get up, how you're going to work, where you're going to work, who you're going to work with, all that stuff. So even as those four trends that I mentioned earlier are going to start really changing work, a lot of those decisions that once were, inside a corporation or managers were responsible for it, they are incrementally being shifted back to the individual. We see this with remote work. I mean, if you've never done remote work before, just the idea that if you're going to work from home one day a week, all of a sudden you have to decide, like, where are you going to work? How are you going to organize your day? When are you going to get up? How are you going to take breaks? When are you going to eat lunch? Where are you going to eat lunch, right? And a lot of traditional work is already designed, whether through very specific HR guidelines or just kind of cultural norms of, like, you might be working in a company right now where everybody eats lunch at their desk. So you're going to have to probably eat lunch at your desk, or you're going to feel that peer pressure to do so. So as we think about managing ourselves, again, instead of looking to be told what to do or looking for the cues of how to do our work or how to organize our day, it goes back to, again, starting with, what do I want? What makes me productive? What makes me motivated? What makes me feel energized? What are my values? Why am I doing what I'm doing? It's asking these questions that many of us actually have avoided, that actually traditional employment has helped us to avoid. So the more that you can really get to understand how do you want to organize your work day, that is going to be a competitive advantage for you, because you are going to be responsible for managing more and more of your own time and energy.
I totally agree. I have to say, I'm a huge, huge fan for myself of remote work because I get so much done.
And it was a transition. When I first started working for myself, I felt like I still had to work 8-hour days, even though it was taking like 3 to 4 hours to get most of my work done. And then I started giving myself permission to be like, okay, because that's the other thing I think a lot of times people are very frustrated with traditional work is we're valued by how much time we're seen in the office and not based on the quality of our work or how much we're advancing the cause of the business or the goals. And that's what I also love about remote work or working for yourself, because they have to judge you based on your deliverables, your output, not based on how much time you're seen in an office.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, sometimes I remember when I was working in an office, people would sometimes spread out their work over the whole day for no reason, just because they needed to fill the day.
I was one of those people. I'd be done by 3 o'clock, but I had to stay until 6, and I was annoyed. You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, I just have to sit here for another 3 hours just because I'm supposed to, because some manager says, like, I got to be there. Or worse, sometimes they'll be like, oh, you need more work to do, so they just give you more work, and I'm not getting paid anymore to do more work, right? So that was also very. We've all experienced this. When you're on a team, there's people who are the overachievers, and there's the underachievers, and there's people in the middle. And I was always tending to be more of the overachiever. So it's very frustrating that I always chronically felt like I was doing more than my fair share and not getting paid any better for it compared to my peers.
Totally. I mean, I've had people talk to me about, I feel like I should be paid more because I do more work than the other people that I work with. I'm faster and my boss gives me more work. And a lot of times, I mean, the company doesn't really care. I mean, you're not, if you get done early, like you said, they may just give you extra things to do. Well, I'm curious now that you're, working for yourself, how does self-management play into your work and your day? Like, how do you use self-management?
Sure. And just as a reminder, it's been a few years since I've been on the show, but I've been working for myself for 18 years. I did not ever think I would work for myself, and I got laid off on Election Day 2000. So I often refer to myself as a reluctant entrepreneur who turned happily unemployable. And it really took me 5 years to embrace this. Even during that 5-year period, I would constantly be applying for full-time jobs. I got laid off as part of the dotcom bust in New York City, and it was tough getting a job in media at that time until I accepted a freelance position. And that was the first time I had ever done that because I was just so desperate for work. And that's when I was faced with all of the decisions that I had been shielded from by traditional work. How am I going to pay my taxes? How am I going to keep books? Once this client is done with me, I have to go find another client. I actually had to travel a distance from my home to go to this particular project. So that scared the crap out of me. I'm like, oh my God, I totally don't want to do this. But as I became more familiar with it and gained more experience with it, I was like, wow, I'm pretty good at this, and I'm making more money than I was in my previous job. So of course, I want to keep doing this, and just the ability to control not just how much money you make in your time, but who you get to work with, the projects you get to work on, your creative process. I mean, these are all the different aspects of working for yourself. And a lot of times people will say, well, Stephen, what's like the first thing you got to do? I've now learned the first thing I tell people to do, how to start organizing or managing themselves inside of one workday, is you need a foundation. And that foundation is what I call your peak performance period. So this is the 3 to 4 hour window where you have your sharpest mental focus, your most energetic, you have clear mind, that you're going to do your best work. So if you're going to do your best work, this is the time of day where you want to do your most important work. You don't want to do distraction type of work. I mean, of course, social media, email has its role, and it might be more important for your work than others. But you have to really call yourself out to say, like, what is your most important work? And defend that peak performance period and schedule that most important work for that time of day. For me, it's 7 in the morning to 11 in the morning. You might be a night owl. You might be an afternoon worker. It might be split into two different 2-hour blocks. And Angela, this is something I've seen throughout all of my research. I was a history major just reading all kinds of biographies. I've interviewed over 500 entrepreneurs, my own experience, that humans in terms of knowledge, mental work, we only have about a 3 to 4 hour window to do that. When people tell me that they're working 10-hour days, it's nonsense. Again, to our point, there's just so much fat and filler in the average conventional workday that could be stripped out if people were allowed to work remotely or work in co-working spaces, that they can get more done more effectively. So that's kind of the building block. I don't know if you have any follow-up questions, because I can go on. So.
Yeah. Well, I will say one thing it's really interesting that you mentioned is the dot-com crash, because I'll say for me that also really impacted my career. I was a senior in college, I guess, when that happened, and I was studying computer engineering and, assumed that it'd be easy to get a job. It was supposed to be super straightforward. Everything was going great. And then this major change happened in the market that made it almost impossible to get a job. I mean, companies just halted their hiring and recruiters canceled their visits to the school. And it was a huge deal. And it's funny because I talk to young people now who have never heard that happened.
I know, it's crazy. There's people in their early 30s who are kind of, were maybe in college when 2008 happened, but they really haven't suffered a recession yet.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I have younger brothers who are twins, and they are 11 years younger. So, they were, I don't know I'm trying to think they would have been 10 or something when this happened, and they were sort of unaware of it. And I asked them recently, I said, didn't they talk to you about this in school in history or anything? And they said, well, no, I mean, it was so recent that we just didn't talk about it at all. So I do think there are people who, like you said, early 30s that are sort of unaware that this, or just haven't experienced it. And, it's interesting because I think it can cause a situation like what you mentioned, where you go from having a job, and then for some reason that's totally unconnected to you, you wake up the next day and you don't have a job, and you kind of have lost your sort of your revenue stream, your one revenue stream. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how can we sort of avoid that? And are there things that you recommend that people do to sort of create almost like career insurance, or, something to protect us in the event of an experience like that, given what you've been through and you've kind of seen?
Yeah, I love that you've used the term career insurance, because that's what we need. We have car insurance, we have house insurance, life insurance, health insurance, but we don't think of having career insurance. And it's not going to be in the traditional way of what you're thinking about insurances, but it's having that backup plan, that plan B, that, if you are going to lose your job, and there's a high probability that across all industries in the next 10 years, because of the pace of change and the needs of corporations are changing so fast, that's going to happen to you. And I know there's a lot of people listening who are like, oh my gosh, I could never work for myself. I have these conversations all the time, and I used to be one of those people too. And Angela, I think the reason why so many people believe that they can't work for themselves, because we had an entire educational system still to this day that basically indoctrinates us to be employees, to follow authority, to fit into a hierarchy, to follow the directions. And those lessons are so not helpful or useful, and that's an understatement of where the economy is headed right now. We need creativity. We need problem solving. We need people to think for themselves. We need people to collaborate. We need people to experiment, to make mistakes. So that is, just the kind of the shift. So at the very least, today I would implore you, just go through an exercise. If you lost your job, what would you do? How much money do you have to live off of? Maybe you want to start thinking about extending your financial runway. If you look at your bank account, you're like, oh my gosh, I can only survive for 6 weeks. Well, maybe right now you want to start thinking about how to extend that runway. Another thing is, what could you do in terms of a freelance or consultant capacity? Because so many of us are knowledge workers now, and knowledge workers can easily be converted into independent workers through freelancing and through consulting. So you might want to start just putting some feelers out. If it's possible, if inside your organization, maybe you can even start taking on a client or two, like at nights or on weekends, or that extra time at work that you have that Angela and I were talking about, if that happens to be a scenario for you, just to start getting comfortable. What is it like getting a client? What is it like pricing my service? And to just start going through that exercise, because it's so much more important to do that now while you do have some of this economic security, instead of when it was all taken, it could all be taken away from you in a day like it was for me. And then that's a huge shock to your system, especially if you have a family, if you have a mortgage, you have other responsibilities. I'm also encouraging people just to start, if you want to go to the next level, like really then take that client or two and start thinking about having a side business. Like, what are you going to do on the side? Because that way, if that side business is warmed up and maybe you're only making like a third or half of your current income, if you lost your job, then you can go full time on it and you can really light it up and get more clients. So that way it's already in existence. You've already had practice, running the business, setting it up, dealing with clients. You already know what it is that you're selling. It's been validated. So that way you're going to give yourself a fighting chance. So that way, even if you wanted to get a full-time position again, at least you have an option, an income option as a backup. Because, as I said again, a lot of the, more and more jobs are going to be short-term, freelance, independent related. So just start getting your mindset around that. Again, I'm not somebody here to tell you, like, you should definitely do this. What I'm telling you is you're most likely going to have to do this in the next 10 years. So get ready, get prepared.
Totally. It's good advice. I think I really like the fact that you emphasized the financial piece, because when I talk to folks, one of the things I really recommend is that they, set aside an emergency fund. And very few people that I talk to truly have a real emergency fund. And sometimes, if they're in a situation where maybe they haven't lost their job, but they have, like, for example, an abusive boss, and there's something going on at work that's really negative, and they get themselves into a spot where they can't quit or leave because they're so dependent on that income. And it's really difficult to keep going in every day and being mistreated. I think another thing too that I always consider is I'm a big fan of keeping fixed expenses or fixed costs low in my personal life, so that if I do happen to make more, great. But if I'm making less, I'm not going to have to completely change my entire sort of quality of life just because of that. And I think it takes some of the pressure off, so that when you're at work and you're making decisions about what you want to do, you can make decisions truly about what you want to do and not about, like, your car payment.
Absolutely. And if I have a free lifestyle calculator people can download at lifeskillsthatmatter.com/calculator, because a lot of times people really don't know what the cost of their lifestyle is.
Yes.
How much does it really cost to do what it is that you want to do? Because a lot of times people are like, I want to make 6 figures, I want to be a millionaire. And it's like, again, that's the I'm supposed to think that I want that stuff, instead of what do I really need and want? In terms of, like, what's your unique number for how you want to live your lifestyle. And for me, at least, that, again, helps reduce that anxiety level of it. And then I do know what is enough.
Well, and how to...
From a financial perspective.
Yeah, and how to get there. Like, if you know what the goal is, you can figure out how to get there. When someone comes in and says, I just want to make a ton of money, and then there's no plan, and it's like, why do you want to make a ton of money? Like, there's just not a lot of thought. That's great. I'm excited to know you have the calculator. Well, so back to the topic of sort of self-management. One of the things you mentioned was identifying our peak performance period. And I'm curious, first of all, how can we find it? What is it? And what if we're working in a job that's, say, like a corporate job where we can't really, we're kind of in that fixed schedule, and maybe it doesn't overlap with our peak performance period.
Sure, and that's the case for night owls, right? They work from like about 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., so the entire 9 to 5 system has always worked against them. Poor night owls, if that's one of you, it's like, that's not fair. So to start, you even go with your gut. You might even just gut check. You might already have a sense of, like, oh yeah, this is totally when I feel like I do my best work. Like, listen to your gut. Like, don't overthink this. If you're not quite sure, the next thing I would do is then I would set up a reminder on an hourly basis from the time you get up to the time you go to bed on your phone, and just say, like, do you have high energy? And do you as a number 1? Do you have medium energy as number 2? And do you have low energy as number 3? So that way, if you can even do that for one day, it'd be better even if you could do it for an entire week. So that way you can really start to see these patterns and trends. And then you're going to start seeing around like, oh, wow, it seems like I have my best energy in this 3 to 4 hour period at this time of day. As an anomaly, I've seen this before too. Sometimes it's broken up into 2 different 2-hour blocks for people. That's rare, but it does occur. And again, with this is not about trying to figure out what is normal. This is about finding your normal, what works for you. Angela, do you have an idea when your peak performance period is?
Oh, I totally do. So I get up every morning, and I'm not a super huge morning person, so I'll get up and do things like email to get them out of the way. And then usually my peak performance period for like creativity is probably from like, let's say 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So that's when, if I'm going to do writing or anything like that. And then in the afternoon, I'm much better at sort of being social. And so I do most of my client meetings sometime between, let's say, 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. So for me, I've really figured out not only when am I at my peak, but also when am I best suited to do other types of tasks too.
Absolutely. And I'm sort of similar, just a little bit earlier in the day. I like to do my kind of writing, content creation work first, and then my social, that connection, my outreach second.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You also asked what happens if you're working in an environment where you just have less control about when you can work. Well, number one, first, this is just bringing awareness to this idea that you have a best time of day to do great mental work, to do your most important work. So now you know this piece of information. So there's a couple of different ways to handle it. You might be in an environment noticing that where you have a forward-thinking company that maybe will allow you to adjust your work schedule for some reason. So now that you know this, you can clearly communicate this and say, like, I really feel like I do my best with this. Would it be possible if I could rearrange my work schedule? So that's a possibility. But you might be on the other end, you're like, oh my gosh, I work in a company that would never allow me to do anything like this at all. But now when you're looking for your next job, you know this about yourself. That could be something that is going to be a high priority need for your next job, right? Instead of always feeling like, again, that I'm not good enough, being enough, we always kind of take jobs just for the sake of taking jobs. And I was always I think it's so important to really understand not just your salary requirements or how you want to be challenged the work that you're doing, but when do you do your best work, what makes you productive, and be able to communicate that to a prospect or employer and to see if they can work with you on that. And then finally, if you do find that you're on a path that you're going to end up becoming a consultant or freelancer, you now know how to start organizing your day. You have the foundation.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Well, so one of the things I know that you talk about is how we should turn our everyday decisions into habits. And I've thought about that, and I'd love for you to expand on what do you mean by that?
I don't know about you, Angela, or anybody listening, but I am tired of being ruled by to-do lists. Because, again, to-do lists make me feel like I'm never doing enough because you can never get all that stuff done on a to-do list, right? So I'm a big believer in starting to look at habits. And you and I have talked already a little bit about that in terms of the peak performance period, that's a habit of like, when you're going to be doing your most important writing and content creation, and then you have that connection habit going. So a lot of times, especially, I'm going to use this as an example, around connection, of reaching out, building your community, building your network. A lot of times we feel this as a to-do list item. I'm going to call 2 people today. I'm going to write 5 emails this week. Right? I'm going to make sure I go to one networking event a week. And what I really am asking people to do is first understand, how do you like to interact with people? Like, how do you like to reach out to people? Because there's so many different ways to do that, right? There's introverts, extroverts, and there's a whole spectrum in between. So really start becoming aware of, how do you like to interact with people? And what medium? Yeah, do you want to do things in person? Do you like to go to conferences where you're going to stay over for 2 or 3 nights? Or do you like the local workshops? Are you more introverted and you just want to write blog posts, maybe do some podcasting like this? You want to kind of create content and put it out there, and that's the way to attract people to connect with whatever it is that you're doing, your message, your area of expertise. So really understanding that about yourself, and then turning that into a habit, knowing that you are doing this every single day. So I have a daily growth journal, Angela, so maybe we can share this in the show notes. And all the folks that I work with, I ask them to ask these 4 questions of themselves every single day as a habit. Number 1, what did I learn about myself today? goes back to this idea of self-management. You want to get to know yourself better and better so you can manage yourself better. Number two, what did I learn today in terms of improving my skills or new skills that I want to acquire? Number three, did I meet somebody today? Back to that connection habit. And number four, did I create something today? Because again, many of us work in corporate environments where perfection rules and everything has to be perfect. By nature, corporations are more conservative. They like sure things. But we really want to start getting into a habit of, at least for ourselves, even our own private audience, of taking a shot at writing that memo before the boss asks, or creating a prototype just on the side. What is the bare minimum of what you can do to be creating on a daily basis rather than thinking everything has to be perfect? Does that make sense?
It does. I almost hear you saying that you would encourage us to be more self-aware of maybe what would work the best for us in terms of designing, how we prefer to work. Is that maybe?
Yes, you know me so well.
I'm like, is that an oversimplification?
The most important life skill is self-awareness.
Yeah. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, another thing that you mentioned at the top of the show was, automation. And, I think automation can be such a scary topic sometimes when we think about it. What sorts of things should we be looking to automate? Like, what should we be on the lookout for in terms of automation?
So the first thing I always tell people is, what is something that you're doing over and over again? That's pretty simple, but it seems so mundane and tedious. And you're like, oh my gosh, could somebody else do this? Is there another way that this could be done? And what I always do when I'm in that situation, I go to Google and I ask, is there an app for this? Is there a software for that? Or even, I just, whatever words come to mind, I just put it into Google with, the words app or software. And I cannot believe in this day and age, there's so many people trying to figure out all these different problems that kind of comes back to that somebody has figured out an app for that. And then I look at those apps and that particular app or different competitors or category to see if that is really the best solution for my problem. I always like to try to find free apps first. As an example of this, many of us spend a lot of time setting up meetings. Angela, you set up a lot of meetings for your clients, for podcast guests. I do the same as well. And I think it's very common in our world as podcasters, as coaches, that we use scheduling links, right? But when I talk to my friends in corporate America, they are totally unfamiliar with this idea. So think about when you're setting up meetings with your colleagues, how many emails go back and forth just to set up that meeting, right? And then somebody has to cancel, and you got to do that whole process all over again. And you think it's not a big deal, but your brain is getting pinged every single time you feel like you have to deal with this. And that's not really highly productive work. That's a great example of, like, this should be automated. So Angela and I, you actually use Calendly too, right?
Yeah, I think that's the one for podcasting. I do some things manually and some things are automated, honestly, with my scheduling.
So we both use Calendly, and what you do is you can just have a schedule of, like, when you're available. You can even ask different questions to prepare people to have a deeper meeting right off the bat. And you just send a link to that person, so that way they can choose. They already know when you're available. They can choose a time. If they need to reschedule, they can do it automatically. They get email updates, like you can do it an hour before, a day before, 3 days before. So it's almost like having this personal assistant just to manage all of your meetings. And a lot of the software you can start. There was a free level, but even the paid levels are usually under $100. So that's just one example of a positive use of automation. So, like, there's a lot of this mundane stuff that we just don't have to do anymore that technology can do for us.
That's a great example. I mean, when you're looking to automate something, like, where do you go to find the automation tool? How do you find the best one?
The best one, number one, I go to my network to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What are you using, or what else have you seen out there? So I always like to because I love old-fashioned human relationships, because those people know me, they know how I work, they know my needs. So they're looking at advising me or giving advice on a particular piece of technology from that lens, right? So they're like, I know Stephen's never going to like this feature, so I'm not going to recommend that to him. The second piece of it is, again, when I do find a particular app, there's usually a blog roundup. I'll do, like, reviews on, scheduling software. And there's somebody who will say, here's, like, the top 10 scheduling software. Here's, like, the whole grid of all the different features, their pricing of the pros and cons of each one of these. And the other thing, before you do any of this, you should really understand your needs first of like, what are the top 3 things that you want from that particular software? What, in terms of pricing, ease of use, or if there's some other feature that you just have to have. So that way, when you're looking at a document layer, you're looking at those 10 different apps, that way you can look through that filter, through that lens, and you can pick the one that's right for you. Again, you don't want to just choose the one that everybody else is using. You want to choose the one that's right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned from your example specifically using a calendar software. I was setting up a meeting, I think it was earlier this week with someone, and they sent me their scheduling link, and they had purchased a custom URL that redirects to their scheduler. So they can probably switch out, to use a different scheduling tool. But it was along the lines of meetwithstephen.com. And
right, like when I have a video chat with my clients, I go to Life Skills That Matter. I send the lifeskillsthatmatter.com/video chat.
Yeah, I mean, it was so incredibly easy. I was really, really impressed. Well, definitely we'll have to, as a follow-up, I'll put links in the show notes. But I'm curious, where is the best place to go to learn more about you and your work? Like, where's the most comprehensive place?
Yeah, I think because we've been talking a lot about self-management, or you might be in a career transition, or you just want to understand your options for the future of work. I have a free 12-week self-assessment challenge. So I send out a new challenge every week to help you develop a self-awareness practice to get to know 12 different areas of your life, so you can really get to know yourself as a resource and really get more comfortable with learning how to manage yourself by getting to know yourself. So you can go to lifeskillsthatmatter.com/challenge. Again, it's free, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, thanks for joining me. Thanks for coming back. It's been great.
This has been fantastic. I really appreciate the time today, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please help me out. Go to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast. The more subscribers there are, the easier it is for people to find the show. And if you're not sure how to do it, I've actually made a tutorial on my website to show you how. Go to copelandcoaching.com/subscribe to learn more.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.